So welcome everybody to what is Connexion's third Lunch and Learn with Republic of Work. So as lots of you are aware, Republic of Work have been running Lunch and Learns for several years now, pretty much every Tuesday at lunchtime in recent times. So on their website, they obviously have both the upcoming events and also recordings of previous ones. So what I've always found, I suppose, with the two that I've done face-to-face and with today's one virtually, it's a safe and kind of relaxed environment, you know, to chat about all of our various stories and to ask questions. There are no stupid ones from a Republic of Work perspective. So again, all details of upcoming events and previous recordings are up on their website. So I'll do a proper introduction of Dave Barry and also Connexion there in a couple of minutes. But I just wanted to quickly hand you over to Lee Gillen. So Lee is an associate company, Lee Gillen Events of Connexion's. This is also our third webinar in recent times where, you know, we've kind of supported each other on those. And I think for me, that's an element of what COVID has created, I guess, is a lot more support and kind of, you know, from both business and personal perspectives. So I'm going to hand over to Lee to do a quick introduction there, and then I'll come back with a little bit more insight into me. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks a million, Dave. So it's great to see a few familiar faces here today. How are you all doing? And thank you for joining. My name is Lee, and my company name is Lee Gillen Events, and I've been managing events both online and off for over 20 years. So virtual events, as you can imagine, is a fairly new stream to the business, but demand for the service is getting higher than ever. So like everybody probably in this room, we've had to pivot and we've had to change our business from physical events to online events and virtual events and then the services around that. But for today, I'm actually here to support Dave with this webinar so that he can focus on his content and delivery. So if you have any questions for Dave or you'd like to engage on any particular topic, please let me know. You can pop any of your questions into the chat at any time. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat, so if you're feeling shy, just pop them into the chat and we'll come back to them whenever there's an opportunity for questions. We'll also have a few pauses as well throughout. If you haven't done so already, if you would put yourself on mute just for the duration of Dave's presentation, that would be great, thanks. So before the end, I'll put my contact details into the chat, so if you feel free to contact me, Dave will do the same. If you have any queries or concerns around this, any of your own upcoming events or even around this particular event. I'll hand you back over to Dave now to kick off the how small businesses are navigating during COVID-19.
Thanks a million, Lee. And again, we'll be hearing from you later in the middle of this particular slide deck. So what I thought would be useful to do today is just to start, I mean, some of you I know very well, some of you I've been on committees with, some of you, you know, are associates of Connexion's, etc. But for some of you who don't know me, my background is primarily HR and organization development over the last 20 plus years. So I spent over 13 years at Eli Lilly, started on South Mall, moved onwards to Kinsale, helped split up Little Island, back to Kinsale. And in October 2011, there was a great opportunity for me to, with about 100 other people, take voluntary redundancy from Lilly Kinsale. I think everyone thought I'd won the lotto behind the scenes at the time, leaving a company that people don't really leave at the age that I was. But I really had a vision of, you know, longer term, you know, I suppose not being so grounded necessarily to Cork actually, hence being located today somewhere sunnier. So it was really the start of, you know, moving the work that I do and the way that I work, you know, into becoming more of a mobile and an online way of working. So after Lilly then, I went off to Trend Micro, which is an Asian cybersecurity company on Model Farm Road. Was head of HR for Ireland and Southern Europe for a little bit. And similar reasoning then in moving onwards again, I guess having then at that point worked across biopharma and cybersecurity with that longer term goal of working with lots of different companies, shapes, sizes, etc. So Connexion, which I'll talk about on the next slide here, I established in October 2018. So still relatively new, as some more of you are in similar scenarios on the call of having COVID hit us globally at a time where businesses are still relatively new. And so what Connexion is, I describe as an organizational HR consultancy, and the vision is really a world of people feeling connected and well at work. And the mission and purpose of the consultancy is around connecting culture, strategy, and people for happier high performance. And just to briefly pause on that, that for me, I guess, is the reason, why I personally stayed at Eli Lilly, for instance, for more than 13 years, and where I stayed in other organizations who shall remain nameless, for much less. Because for me, I felt more connected and well and happy actually at those companies, where for me, the culture, the strategy, the people was all connecting. And I didn't stay as long in companies, that it wasn't. That's not to say they were bad companies, bad people necessarily, but what it's really was validating for me was this longer term vision, of working with lots of different companies and lots of different locations at creating that similar sense of connection as to what I had particularly experienced, I would say, at Eli Lilly. So the values, which are my values, and also people, that I work with and support with, and associates of Connexions likewise. I mean, integrity for me is paramount, which I use the C.S. Lewis descriptor of, which is about doing the right thing when nobody's looking. I am particularly passionate about people. I think we spend an awful lot of time in work, thinking about work. We have great experiences, we have terrible experiences. So I'm really passionate about, making that better. And as some of you who know me well, is if you drag me way, way down into lots of detail, I sometimes lose the will to live. So from a big picture connection perspective, it's really then around, taking that bigger picture of organizations and of the connection within those organizations. So that's just a quick snapshot. And obviously I'm going to get into more detail then of the story in particular months during COVID, but I will move onwards here. So what I thought would be interesting to do is a little bit of a recap. So the last face-to-face lunch and learn that I would have done at Republic of Work was this one here. It was called the roller coaster ups and downs of startup year one, which I did on the 28th of January. And so that was about, I guess, 6 or 7 weeks, before COVID lockdown hit. And I thought it would be interesting to quickly recap through the highlights, I suppose, of that. Because it really resonated, I think, with folks in the room on the day as to its honesty, as to the challenges of setting up a new business anyway, and never mind, say, the subsequent difficulties that something like COVID will bring with it. So what I was really talking about, I suppose, was the ups and the downs. So the first up, I felt, for Connexion was that who Connexion is as a company, evolved much clearer over that first year. And likewise, a lot of the work that I do with clients is really making the vision, the mission and purpose and the values of the company clear. And I think, again, during COVID, not just for Connexion itself, but also, with clients that I support, there has never been a time, where we need to walk the vision of what we are, and our mission and purpose, and particularly our values. I mean, there's no point in, for instance, having a value of integrity where, as we all know, there's people managers, have hardly contacted their people based remotely, for the duration of COVID so far. So I think for Connexion itself, but also for clients, this was definitely an up of the first year. But also, I think since COVID, this has become even more important and has evolved, even more. So the second up of year one, which I'm not so sure is going to be an up in year two, is that the company made a profit. So, I mean, I was lucky in year one. I worked with about 23 clients, all different shapes and sizes, and felt very fortunate, with how that went in year one. Right now I'm working with 3 clients, on an ongoing basis, with very much a plan to, reboot, either repeat or new work with clients from September onwards, but I'm not forecasting a big profit, this year, unfortunately, with COVID, and that's just the reality of what it is. And the third up, which I really wanted people to think about that time back at the end of January at Republic of Work, is the power of associates and alliances. And I can't see everybody who's on the call today. I can see some of you out to the side there at the moment. But for me, in year one, it was people like, Lee, who's on the call, Colette Quinn, who's on the call, another associate of Connexion's, Aideen Shannon, and other, folks on the call here, like yourself, Margaret, who, lots of great conversations, about setting up businesses, getting involved with businesses. I just think there's massive, massive benefit to that, because I mean, sometimes it can feel like an island when we are, a solopreneur, I guess is the current word, when one sets up one's own business. So to have, that power of people whose perspective that you trust, who trust yours, where you're able to get that balance right between constructive challenging and not falling out. And I think, it was very, very powerful in year one for Connexion, as this slide alluded to at the end of January. But I think it's even become more critical for me. I mean, God help people like Lee and Colette and Aideen and others who have had to hear my voice a lot, over the last few months, as in all of our cases, as we're really looking at what we're doing, and more importantly, and what we're doing going forward. So, if any of you on the webinar here, feel you have that, great. If you feel you'd like more, then I really think it's something to think about, the power of getting these alliances and associates correct, and that they can be particularly supportive, not just in year one, but when, COVID came along, and God forbid if COVID phase 2 likewise. So I think it was important for me to bring this up again today. Now the downs, conscious of time, just to quickly, so for me, while those were the positives of the first year of Connexion, and the downs for me is I did definitely feel always on. Like, it's quite difficult when you're the only person, in theory, in your company who's an employee, to switch off. And I think COVID, brought along extra elements of that, where, there was even more to think about, and more not to be able to switch off from. So I think that was still very much relevant in the last 6 months. And the no euro sign, there were times in year one where, I certainly didn't feel I was en route to making the first million or anything. And likewise during COVID, the revenue part of a small business, it's become even more challenging. So I'm thankful, for the pieces of work that I'm doing right now, and obviously have plans to ramp that up again from September onwards. And something that definitely impacted in year one was, I think, people in Ireland in general, are well-intended, in saying things, oh, I'll definitely have work for you, when you set up your company, or we must definitely do work together at some point. But there are times, that doesn't come together. And again, it's not badly intended or intentional, but there was a lot of that, I felt, for me and Connexion in year one. And it hasn't really featured in, I suppose, the COVID period, because as we're about to get into, I suppose, going forward with the rest of the content here, is that we're kind of all in the same boat, really, in that there is this element of being unclear, unsure, hesitant, to kind of overly commit to anything, because so much, could still change. But to go back to the end of January again, and let's start wrapping up this section, this was the plan for the business in, what I call year 2, 2020. Which was very much, and I won't get into all of the detail here, but it was very much a business model that was primarily focused on doing this culture and strategy workshop, which was a half day, which particularly focused again on culture and strategy. The People Connection Masterclass was a one-day event, I guess, which particularly looked at end-to-end talent management. And then the third part of the business was, and is still, focused on consulting. And again, no person should be an island. So I had identified that, that there was particularly synergy on the HR and coaching side of things, with Aideen Shannon of FlexiSmart, also with Lee, with the events, and Colette, from a research, strategy, etc. perspective. So this was the plan, going into, February, basically, and then 5-6 weeks later, COVID hit. So because the majority of the work in year one, had been face-to-face workshops, face-to-face masterclasses. And also, I suppose the work itself, is more organizational than operational. And it became very clear, that clients' head spaces were not going to be in the space of doing these more, organizational and forward-looking focused workshops or masterclasses, or consulting for a while. And then particularly, with all of the working from home, there are, for instance, meetings, or even training, I suppose, in itself, which very quickly was able to adapt itself to online. But for this type of work, I think I knew from the very beginning, that was going to take a little bit longer, and it has. But this was certainly the plan, going into, I was talking about this at the end of January, but obviously 5 or 6 weeks later, there was a very different global change impacted on this particular plan. So I'm just going to pause at this point, Lee, to see if there's any questions. And we have gotten some from people beforehand as well, I think.
Does anybody want to unmute and ask anything or pop anything into the chat at this point? There's a couple here, right? I think, Dave.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and take?
Yeah, I'll take a question, absolutely.
There's actually a very interesting one here around human impact.
Okay.
And what kind of human impact has COVID-19 and 2020 this far had on you, Connexion, or your clients?
Yeah, and I think, great question. I mentioned earlier that, I suppose what's been a huge learning for me is, during COVID, again, whether we were an employee, whether we had our own company, whether we are a client, whether we're, an individual, and that the human impact, again, for everybody, was pretty much the same. It was unexpected, it was obviously unplanned. And, I think going into lockdown had massively different impacts, on me individually, on Connexion as a company, on clients. And actually, Lee, one of the webinars that we've done in the last couple of months was one for Leo Cork City, which particularly got into the detail, I suppose, of both through CIPD, Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development Research, and also, client conversations that I was having, and that people sitting at home, were and continue to be deeply concerned, as to where this is all going to end. Some people have lost their jobs, some people are still not sure about theirs, some people have loved the quietness, others have hated it. There's a lot of hesitance about, going physically back to work, the journey there, the restrictions and stuff that may come back. So I think the general impact, has been, from a change curve perspective, people really moving from some days being okay to other days not. So I know we could do a whole other webinar, as we did, to answer that particular question. But again, I think the core point here is that, whether we're an individual, whether we're an employee in a company, whether we own a massive company, it was a very leveling experience, I think, the last 6 months, where I think we pretty much all felt a version of the same thing, actually.
Yeah. Just to stay on that just for 2 seconds, Dave,
yeah.
I think it's very interesting for people here, and everybody can relate, I'm sure, on some level or other. But I think that human impact thing could go on and on.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're all over it now and that we're all just kind of starting to move on, because the goalposts are constantly moving. The rules are constantly changing. How can you possibly adjust to a circumstance that is already uncertain in itself?
Yeah.
I know I don't expect you to answer that. It is a bit of a rhetorical one, but I suppose do anybody else here feel that same? Can you even put your hand up if you can relate in any way to potentially this ongoing human impact to you and your lives and your personal lives?
And phase 2, obviously out there is almost kind of like a dark cloud, I guess. Yeah, if anybody else has any perspective, absolutely. And the particular webinar with Leo, I guess, got into steps, to try and help, both ourselves and our teams, with, for instance, using the change curve, which is a very simple model, for people to think about one day, they'll be fine, and the next day they won't, and that is change, and that is life. but that we really need to keep people focused as much as possible, on the positive and stuff. So if anybody else has anything, absolutely jump in at any point. But will I keep on moving and we can see? Perfect. So pretty much on time. Lee is nodding, I hope. We're going to move on here to, I suppose, what I'm calling here to pivot or not to pivot, and that is the question. So I don't know how all of you guys felt on the webinar today, and who look at this recording later. But I felt, when COVID happened, like there was so much emphasis on, moving online, and pivoting as quickly as possible. And I don't know how people on the webinar again felt, but I kind of felt a little bit, that Connexion was already designed, as I kind of highlighted earlier, from a longer term perspective, to be mobile, to be online. There were always going to be, workshops and masterclasses and consulting that could be done from anywhere, because for the last 3.5 years, my life and work has moved between Ireland and Spain. So when there was all this talk of pivoting and almost a pressure, to kind of identify or pivot, I think that for me was where it was fantastic to be able to have, those open and honest conversations, with, again, several people, not just the names that I've mentioned earlier, but more names, around Connexion, their business, what did pivoting mean? Was pivoting the only thing that we could kind of do in this particular scenario? So what I thought would be good is to go through the sequence of events that Connexion / me went through, again, involving lots of conversations with some of you on this webinar, which really helped me with the outcome, I guess. Was it around pivoting, or actually was there something else that was going to be required for the business going forward? So the three things, back to my famous power of three, rule of three, that I particularly felt helped kind of my brain in the midst of everything that was going on, with lockdown. First thing that I attended actually was it was a 4.5-week course that Griffith College ran through Chambers Ireland, because I'm a steering group member on the Cork Chambers SkillNet group, so I would have become particularly kind of aware of this offering through my involvement there. And what I particularly thought would be useful with attending something like that is, let's all be honest with ourselves. I mean, it's fantastic to, to kind of dial into, a webinar, and hopefully you'll get some nuggets out of this one. But I just felt in COVID lockdown that I personally needed a bit something more structured, and not just from like a thinking perspective, but also from a schedule perspective. So this Griffith College Reboot Your Business was, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, from, I think from memory, hazy 10:30 to 12, for those few weeks. So what it really provided was, again, a structured thought process, but also schedule, for somebody like me who, was their own business. So I think it really, really provided that. And then they had a lot of practical stories, of people whose businesses had been successful and had needed to pivot. Some had been successful, some had not, how they rose from the flames. I mean, there was some really, really interesting, but again, because it was a program over a couple of weeks, versus individual webinars, of which I had attended lots. And beforehand, I really felt that it provided, that structured thought. And there was several fantastic nuggets there, but one of them in particular, which I've highlighted to Susie Horgan of Springboard PR last week, because I was doing a blog for Griffith College. So there was one particular webinar, I guess, where Susie was talking about, as many of us did, like when lockdown happened, and we all offered help, to people who might need help from us. But my LinkedIn post and Twitter at the time, like, it was very general. I really kind of said, God, this is all awful. If anyone needs any help from a people perspective, please don't hesitate to reach out. But it was so, in hindsight, not specific, as to what exactly I meant. Did it have some kind of a limit, and Susie, as she spoke during one of the Griffith College webinars, she particularly talked about, like in hers, she literally said, look, we are, a PR and marketing business. And, under the awful circumstances, we'd love to be able to do something. So for instance, if you're a frontline, organization, we free consultation, and then let's see, might you need something else? If you're, not in that category, give us a shout, we'll do something. I like, it was very, very specific. And what it set off in my mind was just this whole chain of thought that although Connexion as a business with its half-day culture and strategy workshop, its full-day masterclass and its consulting was well defined, it wasn't defined enough. It wasn't defined enough that in the midst of COVID, in the midst of information overload, in the midst of lots of people offering help, that it would really resonate with people what exactly I could do for them, with them, during COVID, and, might there be something, that they kind of get for free at the beginning and then later maybe not. Like, it was quite, my one was quite unspecific, well intended, by the way, and I did mean it. But it was just Susie's particularly just set the seed of me around definition, actually, versus pivoting, that was Connexion defined enough for going forward in COVID and hopefully, beyond. And the second piece that really helped, again, with the whole pivoting or not kind of decision was, again, all of these conversations, with associates of Connexions like Lee, like Colette, like leading Shannon, like Margaret, you and I met one night, in more of a social context. And I think, they were all so important, to get perspectives on, this whole pivoting thing, because I personally felt, and I don't get overwhelmed like that easily, but I just felt kind of a bit overwhelmed that everyone almost wanted, not everyone, but certainly the sector in Ireland was overly focusing on pivoting, and almost if you couldn't pivot, that you were kind of out, which I didn't agree with. But I didn't necessarily have a clear answer at that point, to be able to, to challenge that particular thinking. So at the time, and I'm particularly thankful to Colette Quinn on the call here, the business continuity vouchers and also the trading online vouchers were being offered, and I am always open, to help and support. I guess I felt to a certain extent that because Connexion's role, is to help businesses, in kind of reaching out for either the business continuity voucher or the trading online voucher, was I almost, should I be helping other people with theirs? Not should I be almost looking for them myself? And it was one conversation with Colette and Quinn, in particular at the 11th hour, I think on the day the business continuity voucher was due in. Colette, you rightfully highlighted, that this was out of something awful like COVID, probably a once, hopefully in a lifetime opportunity, to have someone I didn't know, who didn't know me, look at the business, look at what I was doing and really give that perspective as to, was it pivoting, was it something else? So my house essentially being in Carrigaline and the business registered to there, it was Leo South Cork, would have been my Leo a couple of months back there. So I reached out to them and, very quickly they came back to me and provided me with an amazing mentor who I'm going to talk about specifically on the next slide. She's absolutely going to kill me for doing this. I haven't told her I'm going to do this because she's a person, who doesn't necessarily, want kind of the recognition or the praise in my case, but she's going to get it today basically, and she'll hear about it afterwards, and she can kill me then. I suppose before going on to this quickly, so in my application, I'm keeping an eye on timing. In my application, I was quite specific that I felt I needed kind of, perspective on the business and pivoting, probably, from somebody, with some insight into, the particular work that I did and with online and kind of learning experience and stuff like that. So who they assigned to me, and I'm going to sing her praises massively here and she'll cringe and again kill me afterwards. Her name is Denise Kennedy, and her company is Market Springs, and it was the work in particular, and again there are people on this call, including you, Colette, that could have done similar work with me here. I was adamant that it needed to be someone I didn't know me. I really wanted them to have, an independent, objective and really challenge me and not risk insulting me because there would be no personal connection between us. And so what Denise did, which I thought was really, really interesting, was she describes herself as a commercial detective. So before like she ever got onto what might be the online optimization of Connexion, she put on her commercial detective hat. And I remember the first Zoom that I did with her, like it was about 2.5 hours, where she literally got me to talk through the 20 odd clients that I had worked with in 2019, why they had come my way, what size company they were, what I did with them, did I follow up, when was my last contact with them. Like it was a real, as she describes it, commercial detective analysis of all of Connexion's business in year one, you know, with the view to it may not be pivoting, was required. It may have been something else, to optimize the business for online going forward. And the key outputs, that came out of that work, which is still ongoing, by the way, and she is very quickly going to be on my case because I'm overdue with outputs back to her. But the three outputs, I suppose, which I thought would be quite interesting to get specific with here for you to think about is, although Connexion, again, it's very clear that it's focused on culture, strategy, people. And again, that was primarily achieved through workshops, masterclasses, and consulting. And what Denise's work with me really got me to think about was actually the business methodology of the work that I was doing. And in year one, it was very much about connect there in the middle, where, the workshops and the masterclasses, were particularly around connection. Whereas what she rightfully challenged me was that, if I'm saying big picture connection, for instance, is a value of Connexion's, which absolutely continues to be, as do integrity and people passion, that the business methodology, of what I do should not just be focused on connection, that it actually should reverse up a little bit to, more discovery, of what that company is actually doing right now, the client, versus others. And even for Connexion synergy with a company like CollectQuinn's Real Insights, would be more tangible in that space, where it's around research and insight. And then back to the kind of methodology again, that it would move onwards into engagement, with things like events, with Lee, are kind of more HR and coaching, with Aileen Shannon and others. So I think this was the first key output, that the business became expanded, so that in year one, it had gone really well on its connect primarily focus, and hence the name of Connexion, which is Spanish for connection. But the challenge here was really to expand it to being an end-to-end, business offering, with clients for the longer term, so that, during a difficult period like COVID, but more importantly, coming out of it at some point, that they would feel end-to-end supported, versus the model previously of, as I called it, I guess, dipping in and out, with workshops and masterclasses. So the second piece then, and I kind of won't delay too much here, is that instead of it again being a workshop, a masterclass, consulting, and I'm going to quickly show you this at the end of today, it's currently 19 services, are going to feature in the business going forward, which much more capture why the clients might need, help and partnering with Connexion, versus as it previously did in my year one naivety, presenting workshops and masterclasses almost as kind of be alls and end alls. And I'm going to show you what those look like at the end. So essentially, to kind of cut to the core point of this slide, the business is now much more defined. So not pivoting, but defined, than it was previously. So again, in the midst of COVID, in the midst of information overload, for clients, more clients, repeat clients, who I know need and will need, Connexion now and going forward, that, the needs resonate much clearer with them if they were to click into the website, if they were to click into a slide deck, than they did previously. And I think for me, this work that she did with me was groundbreaking, in that I wasn't in that space. I was very much about taking kind of what I used to do already and just making it more online. And, her challenging this whole commercial detective analysis really forced me to revisit everything in a very structured and, you know, deeply analytical way. So she'll again hate me for the insight and the praise that I'm giving her here, but she deserves it, because it was genuinely you know, game changing for me to kind of come out of COVID now, certainly phase 1, and, you know, reboot for September onwards. So Lee, what I thought might be interesting, as the title of today's is around small businesses navigating during COVID-19, is to get some perspective on the similar journey that Legal and Events has been on, and likewise anybody else here who wants to jump in on the chat or, you know, with a comment, please do that. Again, we can kind of share similar stories.
That's great, Dave. So much of what you just said, it really resonated with me. I'm like writing notes like Godot here, but I'm not going to be able to comment on everything. We're here for hours, so nobody wants that. But actually, is it okay if I bring Gordon in there? Gordon, are you still okay to just kind of give us a bit of an overview about your own massive pivot, as you put it yourself? We'd love to hear from you.
Sure, yeah. Excuse me, you guys able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so I was starting out at the start of the year, focused on sustainability for digital customer experience, and we're pushing so much new video content out there. Businesses are being told that they have to keep on creating and generating content, and also to put a huge amount of focus on data and analytics to drive their businesses. But there's a massive environmental impact to all of that. Even us here being on video has its own environmental footprint. So I was looking at driving a business out to help businesses understand their environmental footprint and adjust their digital customer experience to be more sustainable. But obviously, COVID comes along, the goalposts shift dramatically, and where at the start of the year, everybody was looking at sustainability as a thing that they had to have a flag planted in the ground on. Now it's much more about their own business survival, right? The simple reality is that for any SME, they're looking at business survival, and what a lot of people don't recognize or didn't recognize, but there was the other side of that sustainability coin, which was how sustainable is your actual business model and where you've invested. So you're seeing it now, it's changing, the terminology is changing a little bit, but it's all about business resilience, right? It's essentially that. So what I ended up pivoting away from, and it's not that I won't do the environmental sustainability piece, but that will be more downplayed and be much more focusing on business resilience. Okay. And it's a fairly significant shift from trying to get people to assess where their business is impacting the environment and flipping it around to saying, actually, look, you're an SME. I understand you can't afford a CTO, you can't afford a senior program manager to make the changes that you need in terms of digital transformation of your business. But here's a more CTO as a service type of business instead of driving very, very strongly with the environmental sustainability message. And that pivot also gave me a chance to kind of talk to businesses about some of their more basic challenges. You know, environmental sustainability is a stretch goal for a lot of businesses. Yeah. And unless somebody hands them a very simple program to follow, they quite often don't have time to do it. And it's the same for digital transformation. And that's helped me, you know, it's been a big help to me to recognize that too, is that we're all being told to digitally transform our businesses. But for a lot of businesses, you've got to just keep running with what you're doing and what you know. And they don't have time to do it.
Great pivot, as you said, it was the other side of the coin, but I guess the other interpretation of sustainability from the resilience perspective. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks a million, Gordon. That was really interesting. And all businesses are different, but I suppose, like for me, it was just so, you know, I mean, it was just so scary because it's like I run a physical events business. So, you know, I'm the one with the clipboard walking around the room, you know, bossing people around and getting, you know, moving chairs and furniture and all that stuff. And that all just stopped, you know. So it was like, well, what do you do? And again, I mean, I'm going back to two lovely cliches, if you don't mind me calling them that, Dave, that you talked about earlier. No person is an island, and it takes a village, which I just love, because if it wasn't for talking to, I suppose, friendly associates like yourself and Colette and Karen and people that have helped me over the last few months, I don't know if I'd have found my new pivot. And the one thing that scared me less was when somebody described pivoting. Look, it doesn't mean you have to change your whole business. All you have to do is tweak it a wee bit. So I was like terrified going, sure, I don't know how to do anything else properly, you know. But it was like, you're not going to be doing anything else differently. You're just going to be doing it slightly differently. And in actual fact, when I moved into the kind of virtual events, online moderation, you know, webinars like this, I realized that the core part of my business, which was the event management consultancy and knowing 20 years of experience in events, that would always come to the fore. When I got down underneath the mediums through which the events were now being run, whether it's online, whether it's on Zoom or any of the many, many platforms that are out there for businesses to run their virtual events, once you get down to the core part, the event management part is the same, and the advice and expertise to your client is still the same. So you're just changing the platform on which it's done. It doesn't make it any, you know, less valuable. So that once I realized that I didn't have to change my whole business and my whole life, it was less scary. And talking to people like yourself, and that kind of helped to point me in the right direction, going, would you not just
and like there is something, and back to what Gordon was talking about as well, like I mean there is something for me which really kind of like rattled me, I guess, in that I'm passionate about the stuff that Connexion does, you know what I mean, that people passion. So, you know, if the pivoting, for instance, you know, had involved in, you know, maybe moving, in my case, to maybe the more operational side of HR, which I've always done, and it's not that I dislike, but I'm particularly passionate about, you know, what I now call you know, the end-to-end and more organizational stuff, you know. So I think that was part of it as well, and that, you know, besides the viability of what we did, that the passion behind, you know, why we set up the businesses that we did, you know, would have to be either diluted or replaced, you know, was kind of like not very cheery, you know, as a consideration in the midst of everything either.
Oh, absolutely. That's the thing. And I think you need people to, like you were talking earlier about the Corona coaster, as it's jokingly called, where one day you're up and the next day you're down, and it's very hard to know which day you're going to have. And in professional life, particularly when you're an entrepreneur and there's no black and white, there's no I'm at work, I'm at play. There's a bleeding of all of those things, and it's merging, and you're thinking about your business at 11 o'clock at night.
Absolutely.
And you're, you know what I mean? So that's kind of different then for people that are running their own business. But for that same very reason, you need to kind of lay things out for other people, like you did with Denise and you did with Colette, and you kind of said, does this make sense? Is it just me? Does this make sense? Because I know I won't say what it was, but I jumped down an awful lot of rabbit holes. I mean, I was like Alice in Wonderland, trying to figure out the things that I could do. And it was after a conversation with you, and I suggested something, and you said, I don't think that's right for your business. You're really honest, you know, and it was like, okay, you know, and now that I look at it, it wasn't right, but I needed somebody outside of my bubble to say that to me. That's not either commercially going to be very viable for you, or it's certainly not in keeping with the brand that you've built up over the years. So I think that it's important to run things by other people that you trust, you know what I mean?
Definitely. Thanks, Lee. And again, if there's anybody else wants to jump in there, please do, because I've got a couple of slides left here, but they have some time again at the end for some questions or for anybody else's perspective. But I think, again, given the title and the theme of today about small businesses, I think it's just interesting through some of the contributions there, but also the chat, you know what I mean, to get a sense of you know, several different stories, I guess, over the last 6 months. So to quickly go through then, I guess the more granular outputs then of that work that I particularly did through the Leo South Cork mentoring. So to quickly go back to what you saw at the end of February, as a business, you know, I was very much presenting, I can do a workshop, I can do a masterclass, I can do consulting, and not getting, you know, that specific or defined about any of it, strategically at the time, actually, which wasn't the right way to go, as I discovered, you know, over the journey. So with Connexion now going forward, as you briefly saw on the slide earlier, and I'm not going to go through all these right now, but it's going to much have like a discover, connect, engage business methodology. It's not moving away from culture, strategy, people, but how it particularly you know, does the work and supports clients is going to have this discover, connect, engage business methodology. So going forward now, the whole discover part of the business will be much more focused on the early stages of you know, the employee experience or the employee's life journey. You know, around things like hiring and onboarding, and I'm now already working with some clients, you know, on getting ready for hiring, which is fantastic to be getting involved with and coming out of COVID and stuff like that. And the connect piece is quite the same then as what the core of the business was previously. It is primarily around workshops and facilitation, but the difference now per the list of 6 that you can see there on the right, is why a client, might potentially need that workshop, will jump out at them. For instance, are they establishing a new function or department? Do they need, an extra pair of HR hands? So it's getting into much more services. And again, it's that work with Denise Kennedy, drove the granularity behind these services, and that when the website is updated in September, you're getting a preview here, that the granularity again of the services should resonate, faster with clients, both existing and new, instead of almost having to figure it out. And that's why I keep using the word definition was required in Connexion's case versus pivoting, because this is all stuff that I was doing in year 1 and throughout my 20 years of HR, but they now have hats on them, as I call it, which would make it much, much clearer, for again, either repeat business with existing clients or, new business with new. And then the third part is around engage, which is around masterclasses and programs. So again, a lot of that I was doing anyway, within those workshops or those masterclasses, but wouldn't necessarily have had the hat or the title on it to make it much, much clearer for clients going forward. So the reason I kind of included this slide, I suppose, was just to show you the before and after of what I'm calling definition versus pivoting, where, over the course or during the course of COVID since mid-March, it's been that journey, starting with the Griffith College, Reboot Your Business program, where the eureka moment for me was around definition. All of the conversations that I've had subsequently and ongoing, with, not just people on this call, but also other people that I trust really their perspectives. And then thirdly, particularly the Leo South Cork mentoring with Denise Kennedy, has moved this business from being I do a workshop, I do a masterclass, I do consulting, to this current list of 19 services. But again, they were always in there, and how they will be done going forward will have the same integrity, the same people passion, and the same big picture connection. But this is the journey, that was required, was not pivoting, because it was always designed for being mobile, for being online. But I clearly had not defined it enough, or to the level of commercial definition, that it's going to require to not just survive, but hopefully thrive, in an era where, everything is more online and everything is trying to, find a place in information overload at the end of the day. So Lee, anything else kind of came through, or anybody else want to ask anything? We've got about 7 minutes left.
There's been great commotion altogether on the chat. They're very
Good.
active group. It's just been great commenting and people kind of, supporting each other and all of that, which is great. Like, so there's some very interesting stuff as well. Gordon has said here. Do you mind me quoting you there now, Gordon? I believe SMEs should start to recognise that having partners who contribute on focused areas of business evolution, such as the cultural strategy you mentioned, Dave, cannot be productized, and it is worth a retainer partnership type of investment rather than significant chunk of one-off investment.
Yeah, no, agreed, Gordon. And the joy, the joy for me now, I suppose, is that like coming out of COVID, like work that I would have done last year with workshops, with masterclasses, they're now ongoing clients, because you get to know them so much, when you do a workshop, or the masterclass, that now, I'm working on kind of more, I suppose, almost documenting and formalizing, their culture and their ways of working for going forward too. So absolutely, agreed.
Colette made a very good point earlier. Again, Colette, I hope you don't mind me quoting you here. It's not all about digital stroke online for businesses. There are still lots of old-fashioned manufacturing businesses that are identifying new opportunities for their products. For example, Arena Ireland in Kilmallock doing masks and pneumatic display, and Mayo pivoting to make COVID protective screens versus their usual expo stands and displays. Colette is loving the webinar as well, she said at the time. So
Colette agreed, and we've talked about this before. I don't know how some of you felt though, but I personally felt all I was hearing was pivot, and because I didn't feel that was necessarily the outcome, and at the time, initially, Colette, you'll agree, there wasn't that realization yet that people or there wasn't the great stories actually of people, for instance, making masks, or like Coolgrey is a company, for instance, in Tremor Road, whose core business has been more branding, and you know, they've gotten into some kind of protective screens stuff as well, you know, as absolutely the right thing to do, if that's what their clients, you know, are requiring of them during this. So agreed, Colette, as usual, agreed.
Yeah, it's true, because people think, and I remember, like, certainly over the years, people have, I suppose, a different idea of innovation. We think of innovation as computers and tech, and it's
Yeah,
immediately goes, I don't want to hear about the innovations because I'm not, you know, I'm in a different generation. But at the end of the day, innovation is really doing exactly what everybody in this room is doing. You know, it's just like, you know, approaching your business in a slightly different
absolutely.
way, whether it's selling it slightly differently, or, you know, as Gordon said, maybe selling some parts, but, you know,
Yeah,
kind of holding off on other bits until, you know, everybody else is ready, or just, you know, pushing one out, or saying, I can do this for now, because every other business that you're dealing with, they're also pivoting as well. And you
yeah,
have to understand you're not the only one. So you
no.
have to really be kind of constantly.
Yeah, I mean, actually, as you were talking there, I suppose I'm just reminded of, I did like Lean Six Sigma as a black belt during my time at Lilly, which is one of the best things that I ever did, because what it does really is it gets to train your brain that either improvement or redesign are okay. And it's actually about which is required, you know what I mean, based on data, based on lack of data and stuff. So I think that probably helped my own, you know, thought process during this, that although there was a lot of pressure to redesign almost or pivot, you know, my gut was kind of telling me, even though it took a while to figure it out, that for me it was more around improvement, let's call it, you know, of much more definition, you know, around what I was already doing, but not necessarily reflecting clearly enough.
Yeah, I think
Anything else?
just well, the last word from me anyway, Dave, but actually I'm going to give Claire in Inclusive Cork the last word, because she came up
Yeah.
with the quote of the day. We are all in the same storm, but not in the same boat.
Yes.
Which I
Yes.
thought was brilliant.
There.
We're all going stealing that now. We just agreed for
We'll all be repeating that. So I literally just said I'd include. Thank you again, Claire. So I just thought I'd just include as a conclusion, I suppose, that, like, again, to maybe reiterate a lot of what I've said during that, actually the business case behind this particular business is the exact same, you know, as it was pre COVID, you know, which is very much around, you know, whether it's just you as a solopreneur, you know, whether you're an SME, whether you're a large company. I've done work like with parts of Cork City Council. I've done some stuff with government sorry, functions and stuff as well. So this isn't, you know, just about private sector either. But it is, I mean, it's the same business case for me that, you know, for going forward, you know, coming out of COVID, and please God, that, you know, for you and, you know, your teams, your customers, your candidates, you know, is who you are as a business, as a company clear, is where you're heading, and what it's like to work there, and the caliber of the people that work there. You know, is it all connecting? And the reason I've bolded to find, you know, where it used to previously be bolded on previous versions of the slide, is I feel strongly, I guess, that, you know, again, because everything is going online, because, you know, I mean, I don't know how much insight you have to the number of trading online voucher applications, you know, that Ireland has received, that there is a massive backlog, and there's going to be a massive overload of new websites and relaunched websites, and we're all going to be competing for attention and being heard, you know, in this mass, as I said, information overload going forward. So I think for me, the defining or the definition is critical, but is it also linked, and are you also communicating around that? So obviously, if there's anything I said, you know, or likewise, you know, associates and friends of Connexions on this call have said, you know, that you feel that you could do some help with, you know, as well as getting perspectives and hopefully some nuggets out of today, absolutely give any of us a shout. But hopefully, you know, over the course of the hour, and not just with Connexion's story, but also with Gordon's and also Lee's, and I look forward to looking at all of the chat after this particular webinar. You've gotten a sense, you know, that, you know, to quote Claire's quote there, you know what I mean, that we are all in the same storm, but not the same boat, and that pivoting, you know, does not have to be the only answer. I'm particularly talking about definition, but that, you know, again, it needs to be the right thing for you and your business. That, to use, I suppose, the term that I had on the last slide there, it's all connecting. coming out of COVID and for going forward, to give you, the best chance of not just survival, but hopefully thriving going forward. So, Lee, unless there's anything else, I want to thank Republic of Work for the opportunity. Again, it's always a pleasure to work with the guys there who keep it informal and interactive, and I think we all learn best when we're in those type of environments. And thank you, Lee, for the not just mentoring support, but also your perspective today, and to you, Gordon, and everybody else on chat who provided great perspective and also questions. And so I want to wish you all the best as we continue to kind of navigate through that storm, not necessarily in the same boats, as we go forward here. And genuinely, if there's anything, you just want an ear and you want to follow up on something I said, my contact details are on the screen here, and I think others have popped theirs into chat. And if there's something significant that you think Connexion could potentially help with in time, it doesn't have to be now. We would always be delighted to hear from you. So on that note, I want to wish everybody a good rest of the week, and hopefully perhaps we'll cross face to face at some point soon. Thanks, guys. Cheers.